Hi everyone, and welcome to today's Brandwatch webinar, The Transformation of Enterprise Social Media Command Centers. Your host today will be Adam Bambra, our VP of Client Services in North America.
Hi there.
Today we're going to be covering a few topics ranging from the evolution of social media command centers to how companies can actually organize for social across their enterprise, and then building the social platform. So essentially the pieces that you need to put together a command center. Just a few housekeeping items before we get started. Don't be shy. We would love for you to participate with us. There's a few different ways that you can do that. You can tweet at us at Brandwatch using the hashtag BrandwatchTips, or you can ask us questions in the session chat. We'll have about 30 minutes of content today, followed by some Q&A. So we'll handle all your questions from the chat at the end, but please send them along throughout the session, and we'll try to get to everybody. If we don't get to everyone, we will follow up with you regarding your questions after the session. And we will be recording today's session, and we'll make a copy of that recording, and as well as a copy of the slides available to you within a few business days. We'll send out an email containing the links to those. So now I will turn it over to Adam.
Fantastic. Thanks very much, Drew, and thanks everyone for joining. I've been fortunate enough to work on a number of command centers for some of our clients from kind of inception and just the idea through to actual realization, and then the really interesting parts which are after everything's implemented and really start to get to how kind of value can be added and the kind of problems that come up. So hopefully I'll be able to add some useful context, and I look forward to the Q&A after this as well. So let's start off by talking about the evolution of the social media command center, and have a look at some of the kind of better known examples. So most of you will probably recognize this from circa 2010, I believe, actually. So this is one of the kind of more publicized command centers of its day inside Gatorade. Also, another one that might ring some bells kind of visually is this one, which is actually inside Dell over in Austin, their command center. So really well known for being kind of early adopters of social practice, and the command center was seen kind of as a kind of step on from that, and moving that from kind of the virtual to the physical inside the organization as well. Upping the stakes a little bit in terms of the attendees for this one, Barack Obama, of course, in something a little bit more, if you like, operationalization. That's not even a word, so more operationally focused, I would say. So less kind of marketing and more on kind of taking actions based on social data for American Red Cross as well. This one's a little bit later on, so circa 2012 for this one. And last example here, and this is actually one that we powered ourselves, and this one is from this year, the Super Bowl, and this is inside Mindshare's The Loop kind of command center, and this is centered around kind of Jaguar's ad, maybe upping the stakes and the number of people that can be in the room at one time to react around that data as well. So let's take a kind of a quick checklist through. So what are the kind of indicators that we've identified so far in terms of attributes of these situations? So firstly, do we have many screens? Secondly, do we have people looking extremely serious? And third, and very much not least, do we have some mood lighting? I think we can check that for all the ones we've had so far. So let's have a quick quiz to kind of look at some other potential command centers. So looking at those kind of attributes, do we have many screens? I think so. People looking serious, and definitely some mood lighting. So technically, is this a command center? I would say moving on a little bit, this was actually inside NASA. Again, we're checking all the boxes, and probably a +1 on the serious looking side. So very much a command center. And then maybe looking a little bit more into the future, a lot of those attributes, less people, very serious, and some serious mood lighting. So I think we can add from those kind of little snapshots maybe a couple of bonus points onto the original checklist. So are we wearing uniforms? And for extra bonus points, are we in an underground bunker? Maybe not one we're all going to live up to, but let's throw that one out there as well. So let's talk a bit about some of the reasons behind actually implementing a social media command center and get a little bit more serious with this. So firstly, I love this visualization. This is actually a visualization of Facebook's World Network from late last year. So this kind of illustrates, I guess, some of the reach and volume and scale of social conversations. Some other kind of facts around this. To date, globally, 500 million tweets are actually being sent now per day. And Facebook, in terms of usership, within 30 days is now over 1 billion total users that are active within that. From a commercial perspective, there was a recent McKinsey report that cited the social economy. So that was just across actually 4 industries. So CPG, retail, financial services, advanced manufacturing and professional services. That social economy itself could potentially contribute 900 billion upwards in annual value just across those 4 sectors. So there's some serious kind of dollars that are sitting behind this also. Second up in terms of reasons, and this is certainly not one of the most fun, but it's a reality, and that's the risk. So with social media and the way it's kind of consumed and spread, etc., when people take actions that sometimes aren't the cleverest things. So I love the picture on the top right. Maybe not to look at whilst eating, but in terms of a story. So in this case, an employee, for whatever reason, thought it might be a good idea to film and publish them doing things with people's food, through to account hacks, through to kind of images that are maybe distorting or making comments on brand, through to even just mistakes. So with the US Airways example, pretty recently, rather embarrassingly, and I'm still not entirely sure how it would have happened, but posting something completely inappropriate. The way that is being kind of consumed and can be spread does mean that having eyes in front of that and many sets of eyes and actions around how that's dealt with is getting more and more important. Thirdly, speed. And I think I probably should have called this velocity. So in case anyone's not familiar with this particular example, has Justine landed yet? One example, a story around a PR director called Justin Sacco, who in the space of 140 characters probably managed to get the most offensive tweet I've seen kind of published just before jumping on a plane. And I'm not going to go into the full details, but within that she included, she was jumping on a plane to South Africa, included AIDS, race comment, and Africa in there. It couldn't have been much worse. Tweeted that happily before she took off, and by the time 11 hours later she'd landed, that had kind of been around the globe in terms of kind of media pickup, and actually it ended up with her not having a job to land to. So that's an idea about kind of the velocity in terms of kind of the way things can work in the world of social. And last up, I'd actually kind of categorize this as opportunity. So along with those kind of potential downsides or potential risks that just to be aware of, there's also huge opportunities. So really well-known example here in terms of this real-time kind of effect. This is last year's Super Bowl with Oreos. No ad spend, just some really clever, really quick eyes, quick designs, and some quick thinking. Really quick turnaround of this particular ad during that. Perfect environment, having a command center to actually have people pointing to this, brainstorming, and then acting upon it. And I remember seeing headlines around Oreo wins Super Bowl and such like. So there's definitely kind of opportunities out there in terms of kind of social data as a whole as well. Let's actually look at the kind of data, all the stuff that sits behind what we're talking about today. We talk about social across the enterprise. This is not by any means a kind of comprehensive list of where even we've seen social data feeding in, but hopefully this will give some context to what I'm talking about here. So whereas the remit kind of used to be within PR or marketing or kind of affiliated teams. With social data across the enterprise, there's some huge opportunities to incorporate and where data has been incorporated. So just to give some examples with this for product development, interestingly, actually 3/4 of CPG product launches in the US actually fail, and 3% of those product launches go on to be blockbusters. Between 1% and 2% of revenues actually go on consumer insights, and those consumer insights, there's huge potential to kind of reduce cost and increase kind of reach, looking at social as a channel for doing that, and that's something we've partnered up for a long time with a number of companies for. You also have aspects like review data, where reviews not only help kind of drive transactions, but also help drive that completely immediate and almost unprompted kind of product feedback. So there's a huge potential for learning from that. Across different teams, from kind of demand forecasting within operations and distribution, through to things like social selling, more consumer insights within sales and marketing, measurement and insights around campaigns, and more traditional kind of listening techniques around things like reputation management. And I'd add on to that things like kind of competitive analysis, etc. Inside customer service, we're seeing more and more of this, and a great fit for kind of command center. And when I talk about customer service, I wouldn't just kind of classify that as actual interactions. So looking at a problem or a question and reacting on that. So I kind of term that engagement, but also some kind of measurement and insight around people's experience in customer care, that again are really unprompted within social, and that's really interesting stuff that can be then fed back in to pick up nuances that might not be picked up on kind of the traditional multiple choice surveys and questionnaires that fall after things like customer service phone calls, etc. And then last example here is actually around supporting the business internally. So whether that's looking to understand what some employee issues might be, if there are kind of employee lists that are followed, and on the other side of that, what employees love about the company, as well as things like recruitment. So looking at in social for people that might be kind of unhappy or are using the right kind of language that fits with culture, or even that are just developing, really intelligent kind of audiences that might be an asset to kind of bring on board, as well as that person in the first place as well. This is really interesting. This actually comes from an altimeter group study, so quite recent with this one actually. I think it was actually earlier this year, and this kind of shows an opinion on the stages of social enterprise. And the thing that I think is really interesting through here is stage one, kind of the early stage, which is kind of termed here community. And with this, the goal is to kind of admit the value or recognize the value of audiences that are external. The actual method of achieving that is literally kind of developing communities and kind of adding content, blogging, etc. So the focus for that is very, very much external. There is kind of an implicit internal benefit in terms of audiences being engaged, but it's not really kind of quantified and doesn't really have context inside the organization. As you move through to stage two around strategy, you start to see more internal focus. So in this example, you'll see that some of the strategies to kind of get into that endpoint of deploying social business strategy are things like best practice centers, so kind of centers of excellence internally where business stakeholders can come to. Things like social media command centers where that kind of data is being made available in a physical space, and also kind of the fuller suite of kind of social interactions, not just from kind of listening, but to engagement and pushing out kind of in kind of key areas as well. And we've seen kind of the role for that move to more of a strategy role than kind of a community focus role. And then stage three, if you like, the most advanced kind of opinion here of organizing for social is very, very much internal. So the shift here is moving from just publishing to actually treating social data as integral, so actually integrating it seamlessly, not just into actions that take place in the social sphere, if you like, so not just kind of informing things like content pushes, but also actually in business decision making. So whether that is directions to take products, timing around campaigns, around packaging, around approaches to customer service, whether to kind of outsource or insource, those kind of wider questions that are not kind of limited by and kind of take place solely within kind of social in terms of the output as well as input as well. And here you're seeing kind of some of the job titles like data analyst and data scientist kind of come to the fore. And this is very much where we're at with a lot of kind of clients that we work with as well, and internally. Another kind of chart that I think is really interesting from Altimeter again from last year is some kind of visualizations of the way that kind of different enterprises and companies are organized. And I think the interesting points from this are that the shifts aren't really on kind of the, I'd say, more outliers. So from kind of the decentralized and centralized models where you have kind of no one effectively in control, and just stuff kind of bubbles up from different areas of the company that might have organically kind of formed or grown, or not really in a designed way, kind of come about. Decentralized, which is super rigid, and there's just one team that controls everything. Obviously, a lot better suited, or a great fit for kind of older school kind of media, if you like, that maybe didn't move at the same pace, etc., but still very safe. And then on the other outlier, the other side, kind of around holistic, where everyone is potentially kind of empowered or at least allowed to kind of use social media in a consistent fashion across the organization. But the interesting things to me are the bigger shifts are in the kind of hub and spoke, and also some people call it dandelion, or I call it kind of multiple hub and spoke kind of formations, if you like. And the reason I think that's interesting is because those two formations really reflect, just to jump back, the second and third stages of the way that kind of social is kind of organized across an enterprise. So it's kind of evidencing to me that kind of increased sophistication as teams kind of internally act per stage 2 in this hub and spoke, where you have those kind of centers of excellence that we kind of talked about before, things like social command center. And then for multiple hub and spoke, if you think about stage 3, so where you have per these kind of primary strategies, integrating social data seamlessly, obviously alongside other data. Obviously other data within inside an organization isn't traditionally going to be kept and siloed within one team for that being fed out. So customer service, for instance, using that example again, will have their own kind of data sources around performance and measurement and so on and so forth. Products will have sales information, they'll have their review data, all of these different kind of business information points, and that's really a good fit for the kind of multiple hub and spoke, where you have those different business units having their own kind of like business center, if you like, but still within kind of control of, or at least within visibility of, kind of a central core within an organization. Let's dive in a bit around what we kind of term the social platform. So all that potentially a command center or a social business platform can entail. So there's a lot more elements than this, than if anyone on the line hasn't actually kind of implemented a command center yet, that can kind of need to come together to kind of make all of this happen. So first off, kind of fundamentally is around physical space. And in fact, starting off even with a question before that, does it need to be a physical space? Is that the best fit for an organization? If it is, where is that going to be based? If the company is global, where are decisions going to be need to be made? How is information going to flow within the company? Something that we've seen firsthand from clients that have implemented a social media command center for the first time is kind of almost an unknown side effect of implementing this has been they've seen teams and people inside the organization gravitate towards this physical space, because when you're in front of so much data, it really spurs conversations, and it lets you kind of have a quick look and sense check of where things are. And I guess where that nets out to is, if you start off with a narrow vision of, within our social media command center, we have 4 people to execute engagement. We have 1 person that's going to be, you know, whatever those numbers are for that kind of core, as you would assume it, business function. Are you planning then for what will happen once that's implemented, and then other business units start to take note once the C-suite is kind of seeing stuff that's kind of all happening in real time and really visually impressive? How is that dynamic going to change, and planning for that? And all of the boring stuff as well, like insurance, and having stuff made, and all of those kind of physical pieces that sit behind it. The second part, I would say, in terms of this stack, is around the actual hardware. So what's the best fit for the way that this data is going to be consumed? Like how, who, when and where is all that going to be taking place? So whether that is kind of the more traditional command center PCs or Macs, kind of beaming up to giant displays and display switching controls that enable displays to be grouped together in different ways, or is it actually better consumed across execs having maybe a tablet that sits aside their kind of regular day-to-day, or a combination of both, or is it going to be kiosks inside an organization where at kind of key physical locations inside kind of different business units or different kind of offices, that data is kind of fed through. The third layer of the stack, we term the operating system. So we're going to dive a bit more into this kind of after this, and we're going to focus on this a bit more, but at a top level, the data. So where it's coming through, the analytics, and how that data is being sliced and diced, how it's displayed, so the visualization layer and the things that go into that. And this is often something that's kind of needs kind of to be understood a little bit down the line, because the visuals around a command center need to work in a different way to display information that's not going to be delivered with a whole bunch of kind of heavy text, heavy kind of text annotation, and to people that aren't going to be necessarily 100% familiar always with that data as well. So it needs to tell stories in different ways. And the kind of engagement and publishing layer, I think, is probably a better way to sum that up. So in terms of then actions that do take place within kind of a social ecosystem, how that's happening, and the tools to kind of make that happen. And then the top layer that sits around the social media command center is, we term it a service layer. So how that is actually going to be set up and implemented, decisions around strategy and what social business is going to mean inside the company, if this is kind of leveling up on that, any custom display development, integration of data sources, how that's going to happen, any reporting that comes out as a result of kind of insights, findings, discussions, decisions that happen in a command center environment, and then the kind of operational part around kind of training of what that means, what it doesn't mean inside an organization, and some of the kind of deeper aspects. And of course, there where brands have agency partners that are kind of contributing to or being informed by, how and where that fits into the equation also. So I promised we'd dive a little bit deeper into the social operating system. So I think there's a lot of value to be had inside here. So let's take a look at this. So at the heart of that, that operating system is going to be the listening and the analytics. So that data coming in, and I actually heard a fantastic quote from a client around a roundtable a week or two ago, and they determined this data, they actually termed it kind of a single source of truth. And the reason they explained they use that language is because if there's decisions being made at the end of a process, and there's different teams kind of collaborating and interacting and being informed by that data, it's that kind of consistent layer that people need to go for. So whether it's around kind of determining sentiment around an issue, that single point needs to kind of get rid of any ambiguity or any kind of conflict that can happen within multiple sources. You then have a relationship between that data and kind of publishing and engagement that forms as part of that. And the reason I call it a relationship is because that needs to be two ways. Not only do the insights that come from the analytics and the listening need to be passed on to people that are engaging, but then the actions that are being taken as part of that engagement need to be fed back, because you then need to understand, to quantify, to measure and qualify really the impact that's actually having. So, you know, is the dial being turned, and if so, how? Thirdly, we talked about the visualization layer, or I talked about the visualization layer, and the focus on this is all about the kind of real-time nature, and the way that real-time data can be kind of explained with a visual language that means something without a whole bunch of annotation, etc. And then you come to the kind of mass of incredibly important factors that also surround that. So we touched a bit on training, and actually if the command center means that it's staffing up, there's recruitment that comes alongside that. Implementation and configuration is not just at a tool level, but obviously that needs to be at an operational level as well, across, again, what could be kind of a global enterprise or multiple offices or multiple business units. With things like policies and process, moving from pure, I guess, engagement type kind of process where it's more around workflow, you need to be thinking around aspects like what happens if there's a fire alarm that goes off at this place? What happens if there's no access to a certain room? It's all of those kind of policies, and obviously with kind of social media policy, if you're bringing this data to the fore, it becomes extra important, that element. Things like SLAs need to be fed in as well for things like customer service, and then aspects around these kind of builds, things like project management and kind of customization, integration and development that we touched on before, an important kind of aspect of that as well. And then the bit that kind of joins up throughout this, you can see on the far right here, is other systems. So that social data doesn't exist in isolation. Other data, be it customer service, kind of answering kind of calls, be it kind of web traffic following campaigns, be it any of those other kind of sources of data, you need to think about how that's going to feed in to making the most intelligent kind of business decisions as well. Another aspect that can kind of often be overlooked in kind of some of the glitz of social command centers is the decisions between what's big screen and what's small screen. So I'll guarantee that it's not going to be the most effective thing to have 6 people sitting in front of giant screens looking up. You'll need that aspect of seeing stuff happen, and then the aspect of actually making stuff happen, collaborating, which can often be more of a kind of small screen fit in front of a command center as well. So it's those kind of details. So we're getting close to the end of the time we've got for this kind of content portion. So I wanted to dive into some takeaways from here and also add on a few extra bites. And for any of you that aren't familiar, you can probably guess from my accent, I'm from England, and this is definitely a takeaway, and that's the way it's traditionally served in newspaper. There we go, bit of a cultural bonus for you there. So to talk a little bit around some of these kind of takeaways and some extra kind of, I would say kind of gold dust that's going to make your lives a bit easier, or make the kind of consideration around this a bit clearer. Definition up front is important. So think about the purpose of a command center. Is it campaign related? Is it something that's going to be a commitment to real-time or always-on monitoring? I say define it now. I promise you it will change, and we'll come on to that in a second. But definition up front is incredibly important. The point of whether physical or virtual is the best fit, don't be completely swayed by the kind of glitz factor of having giant displays. Obviously, it's whatever's going to work best in terms of the way data and business units, I guess, are distributed across the enterprise. But do consider, like I touched on before, the fact that even if on day one the focus and expectations are quite narrow in terms of stuff happening within social, these can become a hub. So think ahead in terms of whether it's as straightforward as building a meeting space or having glass screens that view out upon a command center if you're building from scratch. Those things will be oversubscribed. So build big to get the most value. Definition around organizational structure. So it's not just the people, but also definition of those processes and policies, etc. Ask yourself whether you're actually ready at this stage or whether you need some more kind of time to plan ahead. A huge piece that we've kind of heard time and time again has been the importance of establishing, getting buy-in, I guess, is the way I'd probably phrase it, as opposed to sponsorship. So whether that's a kind of C-suite kind of sponsor, ideally, or in fact, let's to kind of backtrack on this. The reason I think this part is so important is when we looked on that kind of stack, we looked at kind of not only kind of tools and subscriptions, we looked at people, potentially recruiting, training, so large investment. We talked about a physical space, again, investment, etc. So all of those kind of wheels will definitely be greased a little in terms of having kind of C-suite sponsorship to help make all of that stuff kind of come together and come to happen. Technology part is obviously an incredibly large part. I really want to keep this away from a sales type thing, so I'm not going to dive too deep into that or where we fit, but it's an important consideration always, and I would say even more so within a command center environment, because the decision that you made or you make is not just going to define things like kind of quality of data that goes into reports, but it's going to be in front of a lot more people. So those questions around that are kind of a bit more uncomfortable to answer if it's not been the right decision kind of first off. And then the final one, this is incredibly important, the agility. So no matter how much definition you do up front, how much strategizing you do, things will pivot. So whether it's changes in kind of business direction, whether it's changes in company strategy, whether it's even stuff that's come up that you hadn't thought about before, I would say definitely consider the agility in which your kind of implementation can be handled. So whether things can pivot from a visualization perspective, whether things can be rolled out to teams or locations where it wasn't planned necessarily in the future, but there's been kind of development or kind of pickup that made it natural to go that way. And also when things are moving on from, maybe if you're at stage 2 in that kind of chart that we looked at in terms of kind of operationalizing social across an enterprise, thinking about the changes that would happen if you're moving into kind of stage 3 and integrating social across potentially all relevant business units alongside other data as well. And in terms of what's next, I can't say that I have the answer. Some things that I would kind of add from my perspective is, so following on from that kind of stage 3 of social being kind of integrated in terms of daily lives, I think the concept of a command center as a kind of really valuable, not so much just flashy, but visually impressive as one part, but really valuable way to get real-time data in front of large teams potentially of people. I think that's going to become a giant feedback loop. So what if you had, for instance, like employee feeling or kind of happiness inside that? What if you had kind of the top things that people inside a business want, and you have that kind of internal element? I think that kind of feedback loop and bringing in data from all sources in just ways that it connects together and just makes sense to different people will just become, I think, a more natural thing in the future. I want to dive into some Q&A. We've had some great questions kind of coming through the chat, so thanks to everyone that's contributed for this as well.
Okay, so our first question is, in terms of an open social media command center versus a closed door, is open more desirable? Are you seeing that being more adapted in enterprises?
Yeah, that's a great question. So yeah, I touched on before actually. We've seen this not so much by design, because often the way it can work is that the team or teams that kind of champion command center don't necessarily have, those decisions aren't necessarily made across the entire business. It's obviously just not the way that organizations are kind of formed and work. So we found that it's generally been kind of a pleasant side effect that suddenly the security team have an interest in social data, or some of those kind of outlier teams have an interest. As the team that generally will kind of sponsor or help set up a command center will often be involved in the actions and decisions that follow on from that. It just kind of adds another element of potential, I guess, sources of business is maybe one way I describe it, or sources of understanding where they can kind of add value across the organization to have that open door policy. So that's been the way that's leaned, I would say, so far.
Next question. In your experience, do social command centers work well in the same physical space or location as a traditional contact center?
Yeah, really interesting, actually. So from the examples that I've been involved with, they have not been integrated in physically the same space, but there's been a bit of crossover. So I think just due to the kind of nature of a contact center, traditionally they tend to be pretty well staffed. They can be kind of external, they can be kind of offshore. There's a few different physical environments, but those physical environments are just by the nature of the way that those things have, the way things are built up on. It could have hundreds of people or thousands of people, and they're traditionally going to be there a little bit heads down on a phone, or answering emails, and generally kind of answering questions in, I kind of view them as parallel tracks. So they tend to have kind of traditionally pretty rigid and pretty well run and robust kind of processes in place. Where I have seen kind of the value add is we've worked in scenarios where alongside the traditional monitoring, which might be monitoring around things like response times, queues, and those kind of more, I guess, kind of call-based metrics, we've had kind of data bubbling up, things like top topics of the day, along with kind of happiness rates, along with curated kind of feedback as well. So that kind of implementation might not be a full-on command center, it might be a couple of extra screens in a contact center, but it's quite powerful then having things like seeing the positive impact of maybe half a dozen tweets that are congratulating contact center person or calling someone out for great service, or a company in general. So we've seen that work. I'm not saying it's not the way it may go in the future, and obviously we'll likely see the balance in the number of people kind of working within social customer care versus phone-based. Not leveled up, I would say, but there'll be some movements in that, so maybe in the future.
Okay. We've had a couple of questions sort of in the same vein, which is basically, do you think a command center could ever replace analysts in terms of identifying insights and turning that into findings for a brand or a client, or is the analyst contribution necessary?
Yeah, it's. I mean, this is something I guess that's bigger even than command center, and I would say that this is more around the data that's underlying. So I'm not entirely sure that the command center layer, if you like, actually gets any closer to replacing analysts or does that job. I would say it's more the kind of analytical kind of piece, the analysis piece that sits behind it, as opposed to the way it's consumed. And in the shorter answer to the question, no, I don't think so. I think that it will be closer as kind of tools work in cleverer ways to do a few things. So to kind of mash together data from other sources, so we touched on that before, and also to bubble up more likely insights. So I think the way that data is kind of filtered up to people that then make decisions can be improved, but I don't think we'll see kind of replacement of analysts for that kind of final level. Final layer. I just think the analysts will be able to will have to do less work in actually getting to the stuff that's important to kind of help with those kind of decisions.
Okay, next question is, what's the ideal command center setup in terms of the number of screens that you would actually put up?
Yeah, brilliant question, actually. I've seen a number of different opinions, and I guess my opinion from the perspective of someone that's been involved with helping them set up is probably less important than kind of some of the people that have actually used them kind of to date. And the opinions I've seen for that, yeah, they move from, we've had command centers that have been kind of 6 to 8 screens that people have found visually overwhelming. So it's been kind of too much information. And we've had command centers where there's been kind of 2 or 3 screens, and then plus an external feed that we found that people have been frustrated at, where to get to the different kind of views into data, they've had to have those screens rotating, because then the fact that they're rotating means they get into that kind of, okay, now I'm waiting, or now I've seen something that's important, I have to wait 30 seconds or 60 seconds for that to come around. So from a perspective of actually taking in the data, it seems to be that the sweet spot is around kind of the 6 screen for actual display, in terms of what can be taken in and the number of ways that data can be visualized in that. But I think just to boil it down to a number without kind of considerations of the physical space, number of people that are actually looking at the screens, and things like the external data feeds that might need to kind of go in there will probably blur that a little bit. So I don't have an answer. That's just feedback from my experience so far. I think the biggest that we've seen so far has been, it's 9 screens with a center screen being like a large kind of display, and that's for the display kind of aspect of it. With that, then each individual kind of person that's analyzing data, curating data and engaging with it, will be working off of kind of a small screen in front of that and kind of looking up to collaborate and see bigger picture stuff as well. So on that basis, you know, you could up it to 20, 30 screens, but I think it's probably a bit misleading. Not all of those are technically kind of what I guess people would determine being command center based.
Okay, we have time for a few more questions. So if you have any, please send them through using the GoToWebinar interface. So our next question is there a particular industry that can benefit most from command centers?
Yeah, it's an interesting one. I'm not sure. Again, I think it's a similar question that we kind of face with kind of social listening or social intelligence as well. There's kind of a steer towards, okay, so it's a giant CPG, it's something with a kind of a vertical that has a giant consumer set, and because of that enormous volume means that there's more kind of implied value from a command center setup. But then the other side of the scale, where you might have a kind of B2B focused vertical that might be dealing with much smaller numbers, but again might have a way higher kind of potential value per interaction point that can level it up. So I'm not sure there is a vertical that or an industry that has the most important or that's the best fit for command centers. There's certainly some industries where there will be considerations where a command center might be a challenge. So for instance, within pharma, in terms of things like adverse event reporting, that would be a consideration. If that data is being displayed in front of multiple people and is naturally formed data, that would need to be kind of fundamental in terms of a consideration on whether it's the right solution. I would say if there are elements of things like customer service and contact centers, there's, I would say, kind of a more natural fit for command centers. So I don't think that's the clearest of answers, but hopefully I've explained my kind of motivations behind those answers.
Okay, and then our next question is something that's been a bit of a hot topic lately, which is data privacy. And so basically, how do you provide data privacy in an open door command center?
Yeah, really interesting. So I think this is actually a bit more straightforward where it's a pure play social media command center, where the only data being provided literally is social data, because then the way that that will kind of traditionally work is that you have teams that are looking at effectively public data. So by the nature of that being posted in the first place, some of that aspect is kind of overridden. Where the subtleties need to be taken into account is where there are things like direct messages being involved that might not be appropriate necessarily to be kind of, or beneficial even to be displaying on giant or on large screens, but that doesn't tend to be the type of data that people would visualize in that space anyway. Technically, anyone walking into that, and I'm taking open door to be open door as people within the business, as opposed to just inviting people from all out. So that's my interpretation of it, because those people are within the company. I don't think there's an aspect of kind of worry from that perspective. What I do think is really important is if you're moving out from pure social data to data from other sources that might be more private, I think this, then it's definitely a consideration. And also, just to, so if my assumption from that question in terms of open door is wrong, and we're talking about the concept of having people from other organisations or kind of publicly coming in, yeah, that's definitely a question that I guess would need to be taken into account with what's displayed on those big screens. We've not seen that, but it's an important question.
Okay, we've reached the end of our allotted 15 minutes Q&A. If we didn't get to your question, either here or your questions that came in via Twitter, we will follow up with you to respond to those. And as I mentioned at the start of the session, we have been recording this, and we will be sending out links to the recording as well as links to the slide deck within a couple days for you to download. So thank you very much, everybody, for attending, and have a great day.